Let's look at ecological footprints. So what is an ecological footprint? Well, it is not just the number of humans on Earth that presents a problem in consuming resources, it's how much resources each individual uses. So we use the per capita to mean what is used per head or per human because we count people by their heads. It's just easy. An ecological footprint is a measure of the demands made by one person or group on global natural resources. An ecological footprint includes the materials and resources consumed and the resources needed to dispose of the waste produced. So think about getting a Frappuccino in a glass container, so with an aluminum lid. That's just a simple Starbucks thing. Costs like $3. That seems pretty sustainable, right? Well, that requires, let's start with coffee. Those coffee beans are going to be produced in probably, we'll just say Hawaii or Bolivia. So the resources needed to grow the coffee, to harvest the coffee, to transport the coffee, and to process the coffee are all going to be part of that footprint. It also requires milk, and that milk, let's say it comes from American-made cows in Wisconsin, and now those cows need to be fed, and the land required to grow the crops to feed the cows, as well as the land required to get rid of the waste that the cows produced, as well as the resources to move the milk to a production facility. If it's a chocolate mocha that you're enjoying, it also requires the resources needed to harvest cocoa beans in the Ivory Coast of Africa, and then to transport those cocoa beans, and then to process those cocoa beans. It's a surprising amount of gasoline required just to bring everything to the Starbucks processing facility. We also have the glass that is going to be required. So you have to find sand to make into glass, and then you have to use fuel to, well, cook it. I mean, you know Minecraft. And then, of course, the plastic label, and then the aluminum that had to be harvested from the earth and purified to make the cap. And after all of this, you just drink it in 20 minutes. Well, maybe drink half of it. I don't know. It tastes kind of yucky after the first half. So you just pour the rest down the drain, or maybe just throw the whole thing, including the rest of the liquid, just in the trash container because whatever. You start thinking about the resources required just to make something simple, and you realize that we're part of a very interconnected web, which causes us to use resources on a global perspective. You can't make cocoa beans in America. It's hard to make coffee beans in America. Cows, well, you can have cows in America, but a lot of things come from our global footprint. So this is a global problem. And here, of course, is the global consumption. You can see some places have more of a footprint than others because this is your comparison here. And it's you can use this on humans. Everything has some ecological footprint. Your tortoise has an ecological footprint of how much it eats. But you can see some places really stand out, like let's say Dubai or Qatar, and those are next to Saudi Arabia. And if you don't know where those are, take a moment and check a map. It's the dark spot in the Middle East. You look at America and you realize we have a huge ecological footprint when compared to, well, most other countries on Earth because we use up resources at a very high rate. And this is where you start asking if it's sustainable because you're an ecological-minded student who's taking environmental studies. And you start asking questions like, can we sustain it if we're all using the same resource? And that comes to something called the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons is when a shared or common resource is unregulated, individuals will consume it at a selfish rate. So here you have a bunch of fishing boats. So take this as an example. Let's say you have a bunch of fishing boats and they can all go out to international waters and they can catch as many fish as they want, which they will then sell. Well, whoever catches the most fish makes the most money. So everyone should be catching as many fish as they can. And when they do, then eventually the fish will run out. So whoever's using it the least sustainably makes the most money. And you can see where if you're using it the least sustainably, you make the most money and thus you're the best person. Well, that's going to cause the resource to collapse pretty quickly. And that is the tragedy of the commons. Commercial fishing is actually a pretty good example of this, which is why we do have fishing regulations. Now, when we get rid of those regulations, we lose the fish. And fish is not as cheap as it used to be because of this. We're going to talk about other examples in class. So to summarize, the natural resources consumed and the waste produced contributes to an individual's ecological footprint. If this consumption rate is unchecked, it can lead to the tragedy of the commons in which our natural resources are depleted too quickly.